Oh, I can go back. Oh. Okay. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. I'm testing out a new mic, so hopefully good R&D for everybody else. Wonderful to hear all of my friends speak before me. George, Brett, Abdella, Jason. And an honor to be up on stage in front of everybody here. And today I want to tell you my experience in building a brand as a coffee grower, producer, in hopes that it can enlighten the discussion on branding the origins. I think a lot of people, when they think about a brand in general, they think about a package, they think about a logo, they think about just the superficial aspects, but much as Brett alluded to in his discussion, for me, the brand is based on values. Values that you have as a person starting a company, and values that you share with the people who work with you in your business, and values that you end up sharing with your customers in the world. So, as I thought about what made our brand start, first I had to remember what the most important things to me were, my values. And you go out into the world with your values and you have discoveries, which might lead you to something that you're enthusiastic about. Finally, I found coffee. I'll tell you about that. And after you have enough discoveries about where your place might be, you get a big idea about something that you might be able to do as your life's work. So that's a what-if question. We'll get there. And after you get that big what-if question, then you can start your brand. So the values are really the most critical aspect. They carry with you from the beginning to the end and everything that you do if you're lucky. When your brand is mature, you can sit in, this is actually a coffee farm, but because I love nature so much, this is a scene that you might see at our coffee farm, a big value for me, reflected in our brand. And as I was mentioning, all of your values that you bring into your business, if you're lucky enough, they end up being shared with the people that you work with in the world. But before you start your business, it's kind of like before you start your life as an infant. You don't have any roadmap. You don't have anything navigating you. You don't have these values inside of you yet. So where do you get these? For me, the nature aspect came from my mom. So my mother, this is her on our coffee farm in Panama, 90 plus Geisha Estates. She, from the time I was very small, was taking me out into the wilderness. At 6 years old, she took me to live in an experimental Native American community. So we actually, she sewed teepees like this in my house. So sometimes my brother and I would be climbing around in this big sea of canvas, and we'd go out into the forests and we'd cut these straight poles that were used to make the teepees. But even prior to that, when I was 6, when I was really young, I actually lived in a Native American community where the people of the Cherokee tribe and also the Lakota, both were in this community. They had relationships with different animals and plants, and from a very young age, I really got an appreciation for a natural, ecological community from my mom. My dad doesn't like nature at all, so he's very much a city guy. He was a taxi driver in New York City. He grew up in the Bronx. He grew up with Puerto Ricans and Cubans and in Chinatown. And he played stickball in the street, and he's very much a people person. Whenever we needed money, I never lived in New York, but we lived in Madison, Wisconsin. He would go back to New York City, make some money driving taxi, and come home with a lot of stories. An interesting fact about my dad, as well as later we started a coffee company together called Novo Coffee. But when he heard about counterculture, he said, that really should be our name, that's more appropriate. So my dad's really a counterculture guy. He loves your company. In our house, at my dad's house, I was a soccer player, football player, and a lot of my friends were from all over the world. We lived in an international university town, so the kids that I played with would come to my house, and my father's friends were also from all over the world. He had many people from different African countries coming over and cooking and talking. So from my father, I really got this value for international community and exchange of being very interested in people from all over the world. So for my mother, it was nature. For my father, international community. These still are kind of the big driving forces for me personally, and later for the company that I have. Fortunately as well, one thing my mother and father both had in common is that they gave me a belief that I could do anything. I didn't believe them much of the time, but they said it enough, even when I was doing terribly in high school and didn't think I'd ever graduate university. They said, don't worry, you're a wonderful person, everything will be fine, you'll be okay. So in the back of my mind, I believed them, and I kept looking for what I wanted to do. But those values, nature, international community, and a fortunate belief that something would work out, with those values, I started to try things. So the step 2 in building your brand, after you have your values determined, is to try things out. So I tried to be a football player. Much prior to 1990, I was playing. This was in 1990. I got selected with my brother, who was on the right, and my brother's friend, all the way on the left, my best friend next to me. Fortunately, we all got picked to play in 2 different age groups of a regional select team to travel to Norway, Denmark, and Sweden to play in very high-level club tournaments. That made me feel like, hey, maybe I can be a professional football player. So for 5 years, I tried football from here forward. After 5 years, I realized that the football really gave me this international community aspect of what I valued, but the nature aspect was missing. I didn't recognize that at the time. I just felt unhappy. I felt the higher I went with football, the more lonely I felt, really. So I went to university at a place that had a great wildlife program, and I got fascinated with African wildlife, and in 1995 I went and traveled around southern Africa, 6 countries. I did an independent study. Saw a lot of elephants. This isn't the photograph of the elephants, but I saw a lot of elephants in the Okavango Delta in Botswana. We had somebody take us as far away from people as possible. I really wanted to try and go as deep into wildlife as I could. In this same trip in Botswana in the Okavango Delta, there was one night when we were 3 days away from the nearest person. We'd taken a dugout canoe into the delta, and we were sleeping in a tent, so that kind of every day you'd get into the water, paddle in the still water, the person at the back poling your canoe. The afternoon you'd set up camp, and at night you'd keep the fire going so that all the animals would stay away from your campsite. And all the while I'd been asking everywhere we were about lions. I was very fascinated about the stories of lions. Had they seen any? I wanted to hear everything. I wanted to see lions that night. So far away from anything safe, I woke up to the sound of lions. It's a it's okay if you see it on television, but if you hear it very close to you and you're sleeping in a tent and you look outside and the fire's down, you become very afraid. So this scared me it scared me back to the city. It didn't completely scare me from my love of wildlife, but in the world of wildlife biology, I found a lot of science-minded people who like to take notes and be in the lab, and really there was something missing about the fluidity of my dad's taxi driving life and the international community aspect. I think in retrospect, I can see that was missing. So you're trying things until you can find something that you can be really enthusiastic about. Once you find something you can be enthusiastic about, that you can apply your values to, then you get into step 3 for me, which is if you're enthusiastic, then you can focus on something very specific that you can get better at. And if you keep going along that path, you'll get to new discoveries and new enthusiasm and new focus. So all these 3 things are involved in that step 3. Of a company's trajectory or of an individual's trajectory. So for me, the enthusiasm came when I first tasted Ethiopia Harar coffee. That tasted like blueberries, and Ethiopia Yergachefe coffee. That tasted like lemon and flowers. Prior to that, I had coffee in my house. I hadn't drunk coffee in my house, but coffee was around me all the time. And it really smelled and tasted terrible. It was never interesting to me at all. But I read this book by Kevin Knox from Allegro Coffee at the time. And he wrote about these coffees that tasted like blueberries and lemons. And I said, I'm going to go to Whole Foods and buy some of Kevin's coffee. And fortunately, I bought these 2 coffees, and he had great Ethiopian coffees that year. I read how to do a cupping, and my mind was blown. So I thought, wow, coffee is amazing, and coffee comes from these places all over the world, natural, places where there's a lot of nature that I know about. And I thought maybe there's a place for me with coffee. So that was enough to get me to try coffee. So it was enough to get me to start a roasting company. So 2001, I focused on starting to roast coffee. Only Ethiopian coffees, that's all we did. So I just wanted to share with people those very, very unique heirloom variety flavors, from the wash coffees of Yergachefe and that natural coffee from Harar. Those two coffees were really enough to motivate me and to excite all of our customers. Shortly after starting the business, I thought I really need to go see a coffee farm. And I imagined that a coffee farm would be much like a wine estate, a winery, where you'd have a tasting room and fermentation tanks that were clean and a tasting science that related to a processing science, and everybody would be driven really by taste. But I went to Costa Rica with my brother, and we hiked this beautiful farm, and I was very excited. I thought, wow, there's nature all around. Coffee grows in a beautiful place. There are birds here. But we got back down to the office at the farm and sat down for coffee. I was expecting to taste this beautiful coffee that I saw on the trees, and instead they served us Nescafe. So this just twisted my mind all up. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened, and I realized there's this huge disconnect between the coffee production that's happening and the people who love coffee taste. So the taster and the farmer were not in the same place. Geographically, they were often in different places. So this was a critical epiphany that would later be a big part of starting 90 Plus. Another thing that I realized as I started to roast and sell the Yergachefe, and particularly the Harar coffee, The hot R coffee was very hard to find. We'd have to select, get 100 or 150 samples per year of hot R coffee from different importers, and when we were lucky enough, we'd find one that tasted really good. Most of it tasted terrible, but when we'd find a great one, it would be amazing, and I'd share it with my customers. They would love it. But then when I talk with some people in the industry, they'd say natural processed coffee it doesn't truly reflect terroir, or it's just fermented coffee. I don't want to taste it. So it was this. Another epiphany was that the industry experts are saying one thing. My customers, this is the easiest coffee for them to fall in love with. They often love it. It's the easy. It was the crowd favorite, really, initially. So another realization that was important. So really focused on those Ethiopian coffees for 5 years, particularly Yirgachefe and Harar coffees, top ones. And because we were very focused in only those two coffees, still as a small company, I was fortunate enough to be invited to be a judge at the first farmer competition in Ethiopia in 2005. And I imagined that when I got to Ethiopia, that of course in the home of coffee, it wouldn't be like it was in Costa Rica, that there would be people who, all the coffees would be great. There was hundreds of years of knowledge there. But we got to, especially in a competition where all the co-ops had produced these small lots, but cupping through all these coffees, it was almost the same as cupping through all the samples from importers in the US. It was even worse, actually. Most of the coffee tasted so bad, but once in a while, these coffees would be really, really extraordinary. So I realized that not even in Ethiopia had production and taste, those two sciences come together. But in that event, in that competition in Ethiopia, something that really critical that happened was when there was an amazing coffee on the table, it wasn't just that it was a score that was 90 or more points. It would create this energy in the room, and all the judges, when they get to a cup, they start looking around and they get really excited about these coffees. You get back to the discussion room, and anybody who didn't give the coffee more than 90 points, I remember the head judge was like, to the court, 88 points, get out of the room. This coffee's extraordinary. So I realized that a really extraordinary coffee has an ability to move people so much. So this was another big epiphany for me. In that same trip, most people, the judges, international judges that came for that competition in 2005, after we selected the winners, we went down to the south and visited the first and second, third place cooperatives. But everybody went back to the capital city, and they were ready to go back to their home countries. But I knew that out in the southwest of Ethiopia, there were wild forests with coffee growing inside naturally, and I couldn't believe that nobody wanted to stay and go and see. At that point, there weren't many people traveling to Ethiopia as buyers. I felt like I was in a very far away place, but I really wanted to go farther. I wanted to see the coffee in the forests, so much to the disappointment of my father and brother, who I'd started my roasting company with, I said, hey, I know I was only supposed to be here for 2 weeks, but I'm going to stay 2 more months. So I went out to the coffee forests in the southwest, and if you can believe it, there's actually coffee every 5 square meters, it's estimated. In some parts of coffee forest, there is a genetically distinct type of coffee. So, and when you get underneath that canopy, which takes a long while to get to, you can't just go right next to the road. You have to hike several kilometers to get into forest like this. But the coffee looks so beautiful and perfect in the understory, and really to see it in its natural state, tapped into that value for nature that I had. And I thought, wow, so many possibilities with coffee. 2005 was a big year for realizations, for epiphanies. I know 2004 is when geisha kind of came out in Panama. 2005 is when I first tasted it, and it was the first time outside of Ethiopia that I tasted a coffee that had extraordinary characteristics, like the heirloom variety coffees from Ethiopia. So, wow, this great flavor can exist outside of Ethiopia. So, I was fairly ready with all those realizations to do something more than roast coffee. And here's where our brand began, with this what if question. So with all those 10,000 varieties, limitless possibilities for taste in the forests of Ethiopia, what if we were to help to push the coffee production industry in a way that would be intentionally producing a 90-plus experience. So those experiences that we had, and every once in a while in the tasting room in that first event in Ethiopia, could you produce these almost all the time? My belief was that it could be done if that taste culture came together with that production culture in the same place. And of course, could you do this in a way that even helped to reforest places? I saw how happy the wild coffee looked in the understory of forests. So could you reforest coffee and at the same time make coffees that tasted and gave that 90-plus experience? That was the question on which 90-plus was founded. But once you start with your idea, of course, you haven't developed anything yet. So innovating, not being happy with the status quo, from the beginning, you start to add layers to your business inside of a culture that you try to develop these shared values. So unfortunately, this is the only photo that I have of Abdullah and I from that time, and his eyes are closed, even though he's got really big vision. But my initial idea, so I left my roasting company, so my father and brother, moved to Ethiopia, and I thought I want to find a way to invest in a mill so that I can control the processes and taste all the coffees and make that processing science and tasting science come together. Abdullah ended up discouraging me from that because he said, hey, I have a lot of mills and I've already got, Edido Misty Valley, and I've got, and he had coffees that were already very excellent. So I realized that with a wonderful person like Abdullah, that I didn't need to own a mill. Maybe I could just work with someone together. So starting 2006, starting at that Misty Valley site, Abdullah was gracious enough to allow me to work within all those segments of coffee that were coming from thousands of growers around his mill that were creating this beautiful kind of blended Misty Valley coffee. And my idea at the time was I want to learn where the best coffee is more specifically and take out the little bits, and it was a very micro concept. I wanted to do micro lots of the very highest quality and bring those to small roasters like I had been, bring those to people like me. So for 3 years we did that work, and really amazingly enough, right from the first year, instead of cupping through 100 coffees and finding one or two, there was virtually there were no problematic coffees at all. All the coffees were excellent. So it was an important year, realizing that it was just in the attention to detail. It was in the love for the coffee and the flavor that you could take care of coffees step by step and make them taste really beautiful. We did that for 3 years, and kind of back to Abdullah's topic about brand. we had picked this place around the Misty Valley mill called Aricha, where the best coffees were coming from. So starting 2007, 2008, we had these amazing Aricha coffees, and that brand got very well known very quickly. There were national barista competitors were winning, and competing at WBC with Aricha coffees and with Biloya coffees at the other site that we were working on. But two things made us change, or made 90 Plus change the way that it was marketing its coffees. One was that actually there was somebody from Korea, I believe, that even moved to Ethiopia, got a small farm in Aricha, and started to sell another Aricha coffee in Korea. And then there was a co-op that renamed itself as Aricha because of the success. But those coffees were not always at the same standard that we expected, so that brand got diluted. And I realized that we really have to find a different strategy for protecting the work that we do. So we started to make a taste profile and name the taste profile and sell a taste profile instead of a place. Secondly, the second reason for doing that, in addition to protecting a brand, was because we really wanted to relate very directly the procedure, so the variety, the microclimate, the terroir aspects, and the processing as a formula to make a taste. So this very specifically could bring that, where Nescafe existed in Costa Rica, it was because there wasn't a procedure for a taste. So a taste profile for us is something that's a repeatable thing. It's something we can do over and over and over again. So we don't have that brand until we can repeat that taste profile. So we started to do that in 2009. And kind of back to George's point as well, that natural processed coffees are very difficult to control. Without a great procedure, without a controlled procedure, you can get wild flavors that you don't want. But we really wanted to also show that with a great procedure, that natural coffees could be very beautiful. So that started in 2009. Also in 2009, a project started that wouldn't come to fruition, actually until now. All those coffee that we had been processing were from thousands of growers around these mills. And you're working with mixed heirloom varieties, sometimes 15, 20, 30 different varieties coming from thousands of growers. And you don't have any control over the picking. You can accept or reject or resort cherry when it comes to the mill. But to really take this to a much higher level, we needed to have single variety farms to work with. So Abdullah and his family got inspired to go out and source and secure land in different parts of Ethiopia, all over the country, with a vision for having single variety farms. And this project is called Varon, Variety 1. And this year, in just a couple of weeks actually, we'll have Jason Wang, Yoshi Kazuiwaze, who's here, Abdullah, and about 25 other people from our international team will be at the first Varon farm in production. It's very exciting, but this idea and vision was 2009. Unfortunately, it takes coffee a long time to grow. So that being said, Abdullah, would you mind coming back up for a couple of more minutes? I know you already had a long talk, but it is an exciting time with all these people ready to come to this first project, and knowing that bringing a brand all the way to a producer brand to a coffee shop where a customer can come in and say, hey, I want to taste coffee. I want coffee from this farm. I think that having an integrated chain, baristas, roasters, producers, all in one place, they can help to serve that. Quick selfie. So, how does it feel to have an integrated group of people about to come to the first farm?
Well, I wasn't ready for this, but I think it's going to be very exciting. I know you're bringing people from Japan and from the US and from
Greece, New Zealand, Australia,
baristas.
China. Yeah.
So I think what's exciting is that we're connecting baristas with the farmers. So I think that's a great link, and let's see what happens.
It is. No, it's incredible. If you see what's happened on our farm, and I'll show you a bit more later, as we brought baristas to come work with us on our farms, they get inspired by all the workers on the farms, and even more importantly, actually for us, all of our workers see how much the baristas care about flavor, and their mindset totally changes. So, last year they might have been just picking coffee as a labor, but now in Panama, all of our workers are thinking about championships, and the coffee they're picking is going to, they know it's going to be served around the world to customers who expect a lot. So, you don't want to say anything else?
Micro lots. Very micro lots, I think that's what we'll do.
Yeah, we'll have fun. Anyway, thank you. Now I have 2 mics. Is that better? It's okay. So, same year, we had the opportunity to invest in a farm in Panama where the geisha grows. And we started a big project called 90 Plus Geisha Estates. I found this amazing farm. It's 182 hectares. About 1/3 of it was wild forests. It's got rivers running through it, 3 small ones, 1 big one that borders the back of this really big, amazing wild forest. And the remaining roughly 120 hectares had been cattle farm. So there were already 20 hectares of geisha planted. They were a couple of years old, but nothing in production. And we quickly started to plant the rest of this, what had been a cattle farm, with coffee, and plant tens of thousands of native shade trees. And since 2009, every time I go back to 90 Plus Geisha Estates, kind of that vision of what the coffee looked like in Ethiopia, naturally in the understory, is starting to take shape. So the forest is growing back. The geisha coffee, delicate geisha coffee, is growing underneath. And we have so many microclimates in this place, and it's a really beautiful place to. It's a big laboratory for geisha study, actually. So we're learning a lot from having one variety and all these microclimates in this beautiful place that really feels more like a wildlife park. I mean, we've got pumas, jaguars, monkeys, 2 different kinds of monkeys, wild pigs, even coyotes, invasive from North America, are down. It's an amazing place. When we first started to get significant production at 90 Plus Geisha Estates, this was my first opportunity to start working with our farm workers to change the way that they thought about coffee. I used to, when we didn't have much coffee in production, the first thing that I would do is would go for a hike in the forest, and I asked this gentleman, Benjamin Tugri, I said, "Can you take me for a walk and make sure I don't run into any wild snakes or get killed in the forest?" So he took me for a hike. He was the one who would always take me for walks through the forest. He actually showed me. I was just joking one time. I said, "Hey, do we have any wild coffee around here?" And he said, "Yeah." And actually, we discovered about 200 trees in different parts of this forest. We found a tree that was 100 years old that was growing by itself in the middle of our forest. But Benjamin, who really had only worked with machete before, he became what we call he became our first super picker. So to train him, what I did was I said, when you go to a tree, don't think about it just as a tree don't just go to pick coffee. First, go to the tree and see that it's in a healthy state. If it's got, we call it maleza, or like weeds, things hanging on it, clean the tree. Before you start to pick the ripe coffee, take off any coffee that's problematic, that might create a disease in the plant, over dry coffee, maybe a branch of coffee that's underripe but will never ripen, that's taking energy unnecessarily from the tree. Take off all the things that are making this tree unhealthy. Then start to pick the coffee that's ready. Only the coffee that's really, really perfectly ready. And once you're done with that tree, the only thing that should be left on it is coffee that can one day become good coffee. So then you've done your job. It's not just picking, it's going there and caring for the tree. So that's what we call a super picker. Then 2014 was really the first year we had significant production on our farm. And one of the reasons I wanted to train him was because I wanted to know what kinds of flavor we had around the farm, and I knew I needed to have really perfect cherry to do that. So he was feeding me cherry like this, and I started to do processing experiments, including drying some flour that you see in the foreground. There's some wash coffee in the foreground, some different stages of natural in the back, but this was all done with very, very, very perfect coffee. I was only about a week into making these small kind of experimental lots when Craig Simon showed up. Craig Simon, two-time Australian barista champion. He had first tasted our coffee in a session a couple of years before. Steve Holt from 90 Plus here sent him some samples, and we called to ask him what he thought of the coffees. And he said, it's like rainbows and unicorns. So we designed that cup for him. That's the rainbows and unicorns for Craig Simon coming out of the cup. But he saw what I was doing. He got really excited. And I said, why don't we make a coffee? You can make a special batch. He wanted to make a coffee to compete with. But I said, why don't we make a little bit more? And then it can be a Craig Simon maker series. So this is how it started, just last year. He ended up becoming 4th place in WBC with this coffee. And very nearby on another stage, it was only a 30-kilogram lot. Craig Simon had just received 4th place in WBC with the same coffee. Stefanos Tomatiotis from Greece won the World Brewers Cup. So this little tiny batch of coffee had won a world championship and come 4th place in another championship. And this is kind of going back to what a 90-plus experience is and what it can do, what one single coffee can do. It's very inspiring. Yeah, so he won the World Brewers Cup. And then the next year, I was lucky enough to find out that Yoshikazu Iwase from Japan, he was the first person to win with our coffee in Japan. I didn't know until later, as this happens quite often, that a barista will have fallen in love with one of these coffees a few years prior, but he doesn't end up meeting us, he or she, until later. So Yoshi was one of those people who had been competing with 90 Plus Coffee for a while. We didn't know him, we didn't know about that, and it wasn't until he won that somebody sent me an email and said, hey, somebody just won with your coffee in Japan. And Yoshi wrote me, and I got back to him and I said, congratulations. And later I found out that he'd written me many times, then I hadn't answered and I felt terrible. So sorry again, Yoshi. But Yoshi decided that even though he won with an Ethiopian coffee, he wanted to come to Panama and process coffee with us. So this is his first day on the farm with his translator. Yoshi couldn't speak any English at the time, so everything was through his translator, Mark. Jeremy Zhang, he got excited about coming to make coffee with us on the farm as well, the Chinese champion last year. And then Stefanos came to make his coffee for his Greek team for the next year, and then we had Chinese and Greek guys together on the farm working on beautiful coffee. Jeremy went to compete at WBC with his batch that he'd made. He's showing pictures of how he did his idea. He wanted to make like a Chinese noodle style cooking. He'd stop fermentation by putting his coffee into a hot bath, like a Chinese noodle style. Yoshi competed with his coffee at WBC, came 7th by just a couple of points, but he won again, so he gets to go try and win one more time. Hana from New Zealand, she was competing with our Hachira coffee. just recently, George from Greece won Coffee and Good Spirits World Championship with Kemjin. And more of these people were championing the coffee, and even more importantly, there were people who got connected with us, had really great personalities, good people. Most recently, Odd Steiner won the World Championship in Sweden with a coffee that was really, really critical to the discussion of brand. Because it wasn't his Maker Series coffee. It was this guy's coffee, so Simona Bai. Simona Bai had worked with me in the roasting business in the U.S., an Ethiopian kid that I met after I went back to Ethiopia after my first time in 2005. He got into coffee after meeting me, couldn't believe that the way that we handled Ethiopian coffees in the U.S. In Ethiopia, he'd never seen coffees like this. He didn't know his own coffee tasted like blueberries and lemons and things like that. So he became head roaster for our company, Novo Coffee, for several years before deciding he was going to come back to Ethiopia and work with me at 90 Plus, and now he's our profile processing director. So he goes around to all the sites and helps make sure that all the procedures are done correctly. But when he saw what the Maker Series team was doing, he decided he was going to make his own batch of coffee. He did it right away. This is December 2013, which is when Craig was on our farm. So he saw that what Craig was doing, so I'm going to make my own batch. And when I got to Ethiopia in February to taste all the export coffees, he said, "You're not going to believe what I have here. Taste this." And I tasted the coffee. You know, we have a taste profile called Nikise. So this was, the base coffee was Nikise, but he did something completely different with the fermentation. And this coffee is extraordinary because it demonstrates that when you create a culture of shared values, back to what you were saying, Brett, it becomes, it's not yours anymore. You're creating a culture, and you're lucky if people start to work within it according to the values and the pursuit that you've set. So he did this completely on his own. And this coffee won the World Brewers Cup Championship this year. It just won the World Siphon Championship. It's an extraordinary, crazily complex coffee. But the most remarkable thing about it is that it was harvested December of 2013. Here at the cafe show, there are a few kilograms left. You'll be able to taste in the booth that this coffee does not taste baggy. And it wasn't frozen. It wasn't... it was vacuum packed, but it wasn't frozen, and it doesn't taste baggy. And it just won 2 world championships, almost 2 years old. So, what can happen when you create a culture of shared values? When you create a culture of innovation, things that you really don't expect will happen. Just a few weeks ago, Yoshi won for the 2nd time in Japan, and I think part of the reason he was able to win was because he's not just carrying a coffee to the stage, he's an incredible, amazingly technically sound barista. He's presenting incredible flavor, but he's bringing this very authentic story. Now he's kind of part coffee producer and also barista. So I want to invite Yoshi to come up for a couple of minutes. So, as I said, last year, hello Sophia. So,
yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Hi. So last year, not even one word of English, really. On our farm, everything was translated. So here's his first public, English presentation for a big group.
Yes, I'm so nervous.
So tell us about your experience on the farm.
That was first time at coffee farm, and of course it was a first time I saw a coffee cherry. So it was a very unique experience because the first time I met coffee cherry. It was geisha. Yes, and yes. So I'm so surprised about 90 plus geisha estates because actually it looks like a forest, and under the forest I can find so very beautiful geisha tree and coffee cherries. Yes, and most surprising things is the human aspect, the worker and the picker. So 90 plus geisha estates, picker, worker, every time hard work for quality of coffee. So Joseph every time communicating and with them, and sometimes angry, sometimes happy, and sometimes playing football with them. So like a family, it is shock and surprise, and I'm so happy. Yes. So Joseph every time same their level and communicating with them, and every time talking about end user experience and about in the world and in the coffee market and the barista championship. So it is good so your worker. I'm so surprised. So very nice, fun. So yes.
Finished? Good job. That's very good.
Good job. Thank you very much.
So one more question.
One more question. Okay.
Yes. So when you have that experience and
Alright.
you go back to Japan and you're in your coffee bar,
Mm-hmm.
how does this experience or how does this type of extraordinary coffee help you in the coffee bar?
Yes. My country in Japan. So we have two types of customer. One is of course focus on specialty flavors and sweetness, but other group is focus just like coffee, so like coffee taste. Yes. So second group needs time to change. So 90 plus coffees can change these groups' minds, because 90 plus coffee is a very, very, very unique taste. So sometimes the barista talk about flavors like so this coffee you can find flavor of strawberry, or you say the blueberry and the citrus. Sometimes yes, of course, nice, very, very delicious. But second group, so like just coffee, guys. And what? So it is a big chance. So our coffees can change their minds. Yes, it is a big chance, and I'll try explain and taste experience. Yes, I will do the best.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Arigatou gozaimasu.
아리가또 고자이마스. 감사합니다.
So this was something that happened that was really unexpected. You know, wonderful people like Yoshi, learning English for coffee and everything. But what I started to realize was that our coffees really were not finished when we sent them away on a container. Every time I would go taste coffee backstage with these guys competing, they would be so good because they'd have roasted the coffee so many different ways for several months of practice, and tried so many different extraction profiles and resting days and water and grinding, and our coffees tasted so amazing from these guys. And most of the time, there's only one winner, and the rest go away disappointed. So I started to think, how can we make them make that work more valuable? And simultaneously, actually, Jason Wong, who's falling asleep now. Hey, come on, I'm not that boring. I know you're an exciting guy, but come on. Jason had convinced me that I needed to go and put our coffees in his hands in China, because otherwise people were going to roast them wrong and it'd ruin the brand. He said, no, put them with me and I'll make sure everybody does it right, and I won't let them buy unless they learn. And all. So these things were going on in my mind, and I thought, you know, coffee production is not just coffee farming and coffee processing at the farm. You know, it really, it's not like other products where you can put them in a case and send them away and they're finished. Finishing the coffee is really a team effort. So we ended up with this 90-plus Maker Series team platform. And as we watch the baristas get stronger and stronger in the world, you see that they're not just important at a coffee bar. Because they're the service people, they're the ones who are the interface between not only them and their customers, but them and anybody who wants to have a great expression of the coffee. They're also the interface between them and people who are trying to sell our coffee in the market. They know it better than anybody else. They're also the interface between equipment manufacturers, you know, who are limited right now. They don't have people like these top-level baristas there to inform their research and development so that their equipment is made to give these great experiences to end users. So this Maker Series team is really connective tissue. You know, they connect the farmer to the consumer. They connect the market back to our growers and our staff so they can learn. So really, they're connective tissue. You know, were they there all the time, there wouldn't be Nescafe served at any coffee farm. 2015, you know, where are we going? What's next? For us, we want to continue to improve the coffee farming model, and by improvement, for me, I mean improving coffee ecology in the broadest sense of the word. So for me, ecology means everything involved. That's the plants, the animals, the coffee, the workers, the food, the energy. We really want to make a internally sustainable and healthy coffee ecosystem wherever our farming is going on. So we'll keep innovating that in that way, and I'm sure we have a long way to go. We're just getting started now. Also, you know, I didn't think, I really would have cringed a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, if I had heard somebody say, hey, I want to have your coffee at KFC, or I want to have your coffee at one of these big chains. But after talking to Jason more, I really realized that the impact that we want to have in coffee production, we want to inspire that type of model in a big way. We want to do a lot more producing great coffee. If it's only available for third wave bars that can only do 100 cups a day, then the demand is not going to be enough to really impact the nature and the coffee ecology in the way that I really want. So the only way for the coffee ecology to really dramatically improve in a larger way is to make 90-plus experiences available for many more people and in a much more efficient way. So one thing we're working as a team together on now is to inform the equipment manufacturers, bring all these people together so that when we design a taste from the farm, that we can bring that consistently to somebody like Jason in China, who can make sure it's roasted same way every single time, and according to the specifications of the people who work with the coffee every day, extract it, grind it, and serve it to their customers. This team aspect is I think is the strongest way to make this standardization happen in automated coffee. So I think we're just beginning that, but I'm excited about it now. So this was about building up a brand and kind of going back to the beginning, you know, what the steps were. So to build any brand that's really an innovative, great, growing brand, first you have to identify what moves you so that you can instill that in your company. What are your values? You have to try things until you find something you're really, really enthusiastic about, and then focus on it with your enthusiasm. And have those epiphanies along the way that enable you to continue to innovate and grow and change your living brand. Find your, well, before you start, find your what-if question that kind of defines, you know, your vision statement, or what is it that you're really trying to do with your company. Start it, and then the ongoing thing is to innovate in that culture of shared values that you have. So for us, that's what we do every day. As you try to figure out what your brand is, whether you're a farmer or a coffee bar or any company, you can look at other companies in the world and ask yourself, what are their values? So one company that I love a lot, much like you, Brett, is Patagonia. That's way beyond, you know, our outdoor gear. If you compare that to somebody in the same category like North Face, you might find different values. You can look at Apple or Macintosh, ask yourself, what are the values in those brands? Do they move you, one or the other? Do you like a BMW? You know, what are the values in this company's brands? Or do you like Tesla? You know, does Tesla do something more for you? What are the values in Tesla? Do you like everyday, you know, frappuccinos or Starbucks beverage in the morning? Or do you like to have a 90-plus experience every day? And as you go, one of the key things too is just there will be resistance to what you want to do, especially if it's different, but it's good to take an alternate path. So that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was very interesting and informative presentation indeed. So it was very good to see other international coffee leaders from your presentation. Thank you. So let's open the floor. So if you have any question or comment to share, please raise your hand. Since we have only one presentation left, don't hesitate. No more questions? Yes.
좋은 말씀 잘 들었습니다. 아마도
네, 잠시만 통역기를 사용하시고 진행하도록 하겠습니다.
네, 좋은 말씀 잘 들었습니다. 아마도 그 조셉 씨를 지금 있게 한 거는 아마 부모님의 끊임없는 믿음이지 않는가 싶습니다. 그리고 다양성을 존중하는 그런 문화가 지금의 조셉 그리고 19 플러스를 만들었지 않았느냐 싶습니다. 19 플러스를 한 3가지 커피를 접해고 굉장히 어메이징하다라고 느꼈습니다. 근데 아까 끝머리에서 제가 질문하고 싶은 거는 향후에 이런 좋은 커피를 대중화시키는 것과 과연 환경적인 문제와 이런 것들의 어떤 언밸런스가 일어났을 때 과연 90 플러스의 선택, 대중화를 선택할 것이냐 아니면 고퀄리티의 선택된 양의 양질이 과연 이게 공존할 수 있을까 이런 의문을 갖게 됩니다. 거기에 대한 생각을 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
Okay, for those of you who don't speak Korean, the question was about whether quantity can coexist with quality. So we've positioned ourselves with small quantities of very, very exciting high-end coffees with 90 plus. And the answer to that is that really 90 plus has been a great positioning coffee for us. And it's also been a learning brand for us. But fortunately, we've learned how to process coffee on a small scale in ways that we can apply to coffee on a much larger scale. So we already have a brand related to 90 plus called Level Up Coffee. We produce containers of this coffee in Ethiopia now. These are the coffees that are going to be going to the markets in China, for example. What we learn at 90 plus, we really want to apply in volume. I'm really not interested in just doing a small boutique company. I want to have measurable impact on the land and the people where coffee is grown, and the only way to do that is through having a quantity approach. So I think that they go together great. I think we can produce high volumes of great coffee, and we'll learn more and more how to do that every year.
Thank you. Okay, we'll just see one last question.
예, 90 플러스 커피는 보통 에티오피아랑 파나마에만 한정되어 있는 것 같은데요. 다른 좋은 그 커피가 나는 국가로 농장을 확대하거나 제품 라인업을 느낄 계획은 없는지 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
So the question was whether we'll go outside of Panama or Ethiopia to produce more coffee. I love the heirloom varieties in Ethiopia, and we're in Panama because there's an heirloom variety there, the geisha. That being said, in the future we may be able to apply what we've learned in these countries in other projects, but I don't want to go too fast because really need to focus. Just like with the roasting business, when we only focused on Ethiopian coffees, I think that was very helpful to advance in one channel. But as we can, I would like to start working in other countries, but probably not immediately.
Thank you so much for your answer. So with that, we finished this session. Please give him another round of applause. Thank you so much for your hard work and the
감사합니다.
presentation.
감사합니다.
감사합니다. Thank you.